The stagecoach door swung open, and Willa Dalton stumbled out onto the dusty street of Lone Pine, Nevada, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip her carpetbag. The late afternoon sun of August 1877 beat down mercilessly, and she squinted against the glare, trying to steady herself after 3 weeks of bone-rattling travel from Philadelphia. Everything around her seemed alien and harsh, from the weathered wooden buildings lining the street to the distant mountains that loomed like ancient sentinels. Her uncle was supposed to meet her here, the only family she had left after her father's death. But the street was nearly empty save for a few horses tied to hitching posts and a dog sleeping in the shade. Isaac O'Brien watched the young woman from the shade of the general store's awning, noting how she swayed slightly on her feet. He had been loading supplies into his wagon when the stage rolled in, and something about the way she stood there, looking lost and fragile, made him pause. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He had seen plenty of newcomers arrive in Lone Pine over the years, most of them men seeking fortune in the silver mines or hoping to claim land, but this woman was different. She wore a dark traveling dress that was far too heavy for Nevada's heat, and her pale face suggested she had never spent a day under the western sun. Willa set down her bag and pressed her trembling hands together, trying to will them to be still. The shaking had started 6 months ago, after her father's sudden death, and the doctors in Philadelphia had offered no real explanation beyond nervous affliction. They suggested rest and quiet, but she had neither money nor home left to provide such luxuries. Her father's debts had swallowed everything, leaving her with only a single option: a letter from her Uncle Martin promising her a place to stay and work in his boarding house in Nevada. She had never met Uncle Martin, had only vague memories of her father mentioning him with a mixture of fondness and disapproval, but beggars could not afford to be choosers. Isaac stepped down from the awning and approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me, miss. Are you waiting for someone?" Willa turned quickly, her hands flying up defensively before she could stop herself. When she saw the tall cowboy with kind eyes looking at her with concern rather than threat, she lowered them, embarrassed. "I am sorry. Yes, I am meant to meet my uncle, Martin Dalton. He runs a boarding house here." Isaac's expression shifted and Willa felt her stomach drop. "I am afraid I have some difficult news. Martin Dalton passed away about 3 weeks back. Heart gave out in his sleep. I am real sorry." The world tilted sideways and Willa felt her knees buckle. Isaac moved fast, catching her before she could fall, his strong hands gripping her arms firmly but gently. "Easy now. Let me help you sit down." He guided her to a bench outside the store and she sank onto it gratefully, her mind reeling. 3 weeks ago. Her uncle had died before she had even left Philadelphia, and his letter was still in her bag, a promise that would never be kept. She was alone in a strange town with $30 to her name and nowhere to go. "Can I get you some water?" Isaac asked, crouching down so he was at eye level with her. His hands still rested lightly on her arms, steadying her. "Yes, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Isaac hurried into the store and returned with a tin cup filled with cool water from the pump. Willa drank gratefully, the water helping to clear her head slightly. When she handed the cup back, she realized her hands were still shaking, and she tried to hide them in the folds of her dress. "What is your name, miss?" Isaac asked gently. "Willa Dalton. I came from Philadelphia." "Isaac O'Brien. I own a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town." He studied her carefully, noting the quality of her dress despite its worn condition, the educated way she spoke, the obvious distress in her eyes. Did you have other arrangements, or was your uncle your only plan? Willa felt tears prickling at her eyes but refused to let them fall. He was all I had. My father died in February, and there was nothing left after the debts were settled. Uncle Martin offered me work and a home. Isaac sat down on the bench beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. He was not a man given to impulsive decisions, but something about this woman's situation tugged at something deep in his chest. She was clearly educated and refined, completely out of place in this rough mining town, and those trembling hands spoke of a deeper pain than just the shock of bad news. "The boarding house is still running," he said slowly. "Martin's business partner, a woman named Ruth Carver, took over when he died. She might have use for help if you are looking for work." Hope flickered in Willa's eyes. "Do you think she would see me?" "I can take you there right now if you would like." Willa nodded gratefully, and Isaac helped her to her feet, picking up her carpetbag with his free hand. His other hand stayed at her elbow, steadying her as they walked down the dusty street. Willa was acutely aware of his touch, firm and warm, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt a small measure of safety. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden building painted white, with a wide front porch and flower boxes in the windows that held brave blooms despite the harsh climate. Isaac knocked on the door, and after a moment, it swung open to reveal a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her sharp eyes took in Willa with a single sweeping glance. "Ruth, this is Willa Dalton. She is Martin's niece, just arrived from Philadelphia." Ruth's expression softened slightly. "Martin spoke of you. He was hoping you would come. I am sorry you had to learn of his passing this way." "May we come in?" Isaac asked. Ruth stepped aside, and they entered a neat parlor with simple furniture and lace curtains. The house smelled of baking bread and lemon polish, and Willa felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. At least this place felt like civilization. "I suppose you have come about his offer of work," Ruth said, gesturing for them to sit. Isaac set Willa's bag down and remained standing, his hat in his hands. "Yes, madam," Willa said, forcing herself to sit up straight despite her exhaustion. "I have experience managing a household. My father and I lived alone after my mother died, and I handled all the domestic arrangements." Ruth studied her carefully. "Can you cook for 20 people at a time? Can you wash linens until your hands are raw? Can you deal with miners who come in drunk and demanding?" Willa felt her hope beginning to crumble, but she lifted her chin. "I can learn. I am a hard worker, and I have nowhere else to go." "I can see that," Ruth said, not unkindly. "But I already have 2 girls helping me, and business has been slow since the Silver Queen mine cut back operations. I cannot afford to take on another worker, especially one who needs training." Isaac watched Willa's face fall, saw the way her hands began trembling again in her lap. He found himself speaking before he had fully thought it through. "I could use help at the ranch." Both women looked at him in surprise. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Isaac O'Brien, you have never hired household help in your life." "Well, maybe it is time I did," he said, his jaw set. "The place is a mess. I have 2 ranch hands who can barely boil water, and we have been living like bachelors for too long. Miss Dalton here is educated and refined. She could keep the house, do the cooking, maybe help with the books. I can pay fair wages and provide room and board." Willa stared at him, torn between gratitude and uncertainty. "Mr. O'Brien, I cannot impose on your charity." "It is not charity if you are working for it," Isaac said firmly. "I need the help and you need the work. Seems like a practical arrangement to me." Ruth looked between them, her expression thoughtful. "It would solve both your problems, but Willa, you should know that Isaac's ranch is 5 miles from town. You would be isolated out there with 3 men. Your reputation could suffer. My reputation is the least of my concerns right now, Willa said quietly. But Mr. O'Brien, are you certain? You do not know anything about me. Isaac met her eyes directly. I know you are brave enough to travel alone across the country to start a new life. I know you are educated and well-spoken, and I know you need help right now. That is enough for me. Willa felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Nevada heat. This stranger was offering her a lifeline when he had no obligation to do so, and his eyes held nothing but honesty and kindness. Her hands were still trembling, but she nodded. Then I accept your offer, Mr. O'Brien. Thank you. Call me Isaac. If we are going to be working together, we might as well be on friendly terms. Then you must call me Willa. Ruth stood up, shaking her head slightly but smiling. Well then, it is settled. Isaac, you treat this girl right or you will answer to me. Yes, madam, Isaac said, a small smile tugging at his lips. He turned to Willa. Are you well enough to travel or would you like to rest first? I would prefer to go now if you do not mind. I have been traveling so long that another 5 miles will not make much difference. Isaac helped her back to his wagon, which was loaded with supplies from the general store. He arranged some burlap sacks to make a more comfortable seat for her and made sure she was settled before climbing up beside her. As they rolled out of town, Willa looked back at Lone Pine, at the small cluster of buildings that represented the only civilization for miles, and felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Have you always lived in Nevada? She asked, trying to distract herself from her anxiety. Born in Texas, Isaac said, his eyes on the road ahead. My father was a cowboy, moved from place to place following work. He taught me everything about ranching before he died when I was 16. I worked on other people's ranches for years, saving every penny until I could buy my own land. Came to Nevada 6 years ago when I heard there was good grazing land available cheap. Do you have other family? A sister in California. She married a farmer out there. We write letters, but I have not seen her in 3 years. He glanced at her. What about you? Any other family besides Martin? No one. My mother died when I was 12. My father never remarried. He was a professor of literature at the university. She paused, her voice growing softer. He loved books more than anything, and they were what killed him in the end. He borrowed money to buy a rare manuscript collection, thinking he could sell it for a profit, but the buyer backed out. The debt buried him, and the stress stopped his heart. I am sorry, Isaac said quietly. That is a hard burden to carry. The hardest part was watching him worry himself to death and being unable to help. I tried to find work, but respectable positions for women are scarce, and the wages are barely enough to feed one person, let alone pay debts. She looked down at her hands. I felt so useless. Isaac was quiet for a moment, then said, You are not useless, Willa. You survived losing everything and had the courage to come west alone. That takes strength most people do not have. His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and she felt tears threatening again. Thank you for saying that, and thank you for helping me today. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been there. I am glad I was, Isaac said simply. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking along the dusty road. The landscape was stark and beautiful in its own way, with sagebrush dotting the brown earth and the mountains rising in the distance like a purple wall. Willa had never seen so much open space, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. As they crested a small rise, Isaac pointed ahead. There it is. The ranch spread out before them in a shallow valley, protected from the worst winds by low hills on 3 sides. The main house was a sturdy wooden structure with a stone chimney, smaller than she had expected but solid-looking. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral where several horses milled about. Two smaller cabins sat a short distance from the main house, likely for the ranch hands Isaac had mentioned. "It is not fancy," Isaac said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it is built solid and the roof does not leak." "It looks wonderful," Willa said honestly. After weeks of cramped stage coaches and cheap hotel rooms, anywhere with walls and a real bed seemed like paradise. As they pulled up to the house, two men emerged from the barn. Both were dusty and weathered, clearly having spent the day working. The older one was probably in his 40s, with a graying beard and a slight limp. The younger was perhaps 20, with red hair and an abundance of freckles. "Boys, this is Willa Dalton," Isaac said as he helped her down from the wagon. "She will be keeping house for us and handling the cooking." "Willa, this is Dutch Morgan and Tommy Walsh." Dutch pulled off his hat respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, madam. It will be nice to have proper cooking around here." Tommy just stared, his mouth slightly open, until Dutch elbowed him. Yes, madam. Welcome." "Thank you both," Willa said, managing a small smile despite her exhaustion. Isaac carried her bag toward the house. "Dutch, Tommy, can you finish unloading the wagon? I am going to show Willa around." The inside of the house was as simple as the outside, but it was clean if cluttered. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace, a wooden table with chairs, and a few mismatched pieces of furniture. Two doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. "The bedroom on the right is mine," Isaac said. "The one on the left has been used for storage, but we can clear it out for you. There is a bed frame in there somewhere under all the junk." "I do not want to put you out," Willa said. "You are not. I have been meaning to organize that room for months. This gives me a good reason." He set her bag down and looked around the main room with fresh eyes, seeing it as she must see it. "I know it is not much compared to what you are probably used to." "It is perfect," Willa said, and she meant it. The house felt like a home, lived in and real, not the hollow shell her father's house had become in those final desperate months. "When would you like me to start working?" "Not until you have rested. You look dead on your feet." Isaac moved toward the door. "I will get Dutch and Tommy to help clear out your room. In the meantime, there is water in that pitcher if you are thirsty, and you can sit wherever you like." But as he turned away, Willa's legs suddenly gave out, her exhaustion and the shock of the day finally overwhelming her. Isaac caught her before she hit the floor, his arms coming around her firmly. "Easy, I have got you." He guided her to the worn sofa and helped her sit, keeping his hands on her shoulders until he was sure she was stable. Willa's hands were shaking worse than ever, and she tried uselessly to hide them. "How long have your hands been doing that?" Isaac asked gently. "Since my father died. The doctors said it was nerves, that it would pass with time and rest." She laughed bitterly. "I have had neither." Isaac crouched down in front of her, and before she could react, he took both her trembling hands in his own. His hands were large and calloused from hard work, warm and steady, and as he held hers firmly, the shaking gradually began to subside. "Sometimes we just need someone to hold on to," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. Willa stared at their joined hands, feeling something unlock in her chest. She had been so alone for so long, carrying everything by herself, and the simple act of being held steady by someone else made her want to weep. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am not usually this weak." "You are not weak," Isaac said firmly, his grip on her hands never wavering. "You are exhausted and overwhelmed, and that is different. You have been through more in the past 6 months than most people face in a lifetime. You do not even know me. Why are you being so kind?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. "My mother died when I was young, and my father raised me and my sister alone. I watched him struggle, watched him carry burdens that were too heavy for one person. People helped us when they did not have to, and my father always said we had an obligation to pass that kindness forward. Besides, he added with a small smile, you look like you were about to fall over, and I am not about to let that happen while you are under my roof. Willa felt tears slide down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were not tears of despair. I will work hard for you. I promise I will earn my keep. I know you will, but right now you need to rest. He released one of her hands but kept holding the other, noting that it had stopped shaking. Let me get that room cleared out for you. True to his word, Isaac enlisted Dutch and Tommy's help, and within an hour they had transformed the storage room into a simple but clean bedroom. They moved out boxes of old tack and supplies, swept away the dust, and uncovered a sturdy bed frame that they fitted with a mattress from the barn. Willa insisted on helping make up the bed with linens they found in a trunk, and by the time the sun was setting, she had a space of her own. It is not fancy, Isaac said again, standing in the doorway. It is mine, Willa said softly, running her hand over the quilt. That is more than I have had in a long time. That evening, despite Willa's protests that she should be the one cooking, Isaac insisted she rest while he and the ranch hands prepared a simple supper of beans, salt pork, and cornbread. It was plain food, but Willa ate hungrily, realizing she had barely eaten anything substantial in days. The three men were quiet and respectful, clearly trying not to overwhelm her with their presence. After supper, Willa insisted on at least helping clean up, and Isaac let her, recognizing that she needed to feel useful. They worked side by side at the wash basin, and Isaac found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, the quiet efficiency of her movements, the way a strand of dark hair had escaped her bun to curl against her neck. What time do you usually start working in the morning? Willa asked, drying a plate. We are up before dawn usually, but you do not need to keep to our schedule. Sleep as late as you need to. I would prefer to wake with everyone else. I want to start as I mean to go on. Isaac nodded, respecting her determination. Then I will make sure someone wakes you at 5. Willa did not admit that she had been waking before dawn for months anyway, jolted awake by nightmares of her father's death and the subsequent loss of everything she had known. At least here, the early rising would have a purpose. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the little room, Willa stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied softly. The wind whispered around the eaves. And in the room next to hers, she could hear the faint sounds of Isaac moving around before settling into his own bed. She thought about how his hands had steadied hers, how his presence had made her feel safe for the first time in months. It was dangerous to rely on anyone. She knew that now. But as exhaustion finally pulled her under, her last thought was that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could begin to heal. Isaac lay awake in his own bed, staring at the same ceiling and thinking about the woman sleeping in the next room. He had surprised himself today with his impulsive offer, but he could not regret it. There had been something about the way she had stood there in the street, lost and trembling, that had called to something deep in his protective instincts. He told himself it was just common decency, but he knew it was more than that. When he had held her hands to still their shaking, he had felt a connection that went beyond simple kindness. He turned onto his side, punching his pillow into a more comfortable shape. It was foolish to develop feelings for a woman who had just arrived and would probably leave as soon as she had saved enough money to go somewhere more civilized. Willa Dalton was educated and refined, used to city life and culture. What could Nevada's harsh landscape and a simple ranch possibly offer someone like her in the long term? But even as he told himself this, He remembered the way she had looked at the ranch when they arrived, the honest appreciation in her eyes when she said it looked wonderful, and the way her hands had finally stopped shaking in his grip, as if she had been waiting her whole life for someone to hold her steady. Sleep came slowly for both of them. Willa woke to a gentle knock on her door and Dutch's gruff voice saying, "5 o'clock, madam." She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, braided her hair, and emerged into the main room to find Isaac already stoking the fire in the stove. "Morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "Did you sleep all right?" "Better than I have in months, actually," Willa admitted. "The quiet here is different from the city. It takes some getting used to. Coffee will be ready in a few minutes." Willa looked around the kitchen area, mentally cataloging what was there and what she would need. "Where do you keep the supplies?" "Pantry is through that door." "We stocked up yesterday, so there should be plenty." Willa explored the small pantry, finding it surprisingly well stocked with flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, a few tins of vegetables, and even some dried fruit. She emerged with her arms full and set about making a proper breakfast. Isaac watched her work, noting the confident way she moved around the unfamiliar kitchen, and felt a sense of rightness settle over him. By the time Dutch and Tommy came in from their early morning check of the stock, Willa had produced a breakfast of scrambled eggs, fried potatoes, bacon, and fresh biscuits. The three men stared at the spread in amazement. "Madam, I think I might cry," Tommy said seriously. "We have been living on burned beans and hardtack for 6 months." Even Dutch, who was usually taciturn, nodded enthusiastically. "This looks wonderful, Miss Dalton. Please call me Willa. And it is my pleasure. A proper breakfast is the least I can do." They ate together at the large wooden table, and Willa felt herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. This was familiar territory, feeding people and managing a household. She could do this. Her hands were steady as she poured coffee and passed plates, and she caught Isaac watching her with a soft expression that made her heart skip. After breakfast, Isaac outlined the daily routine for her. "We work the ranch from dawn until midday, break for dinner, then work until dusk. Supper is usually simple since we are all tired. Dutch and Tommy bunk in the cabins, so you do not need to worry about cleaning those. But keeping this house and doing the cooking would be a great help." "What about laundry?" "We have been taking it to a woman in town, but if you could handle it here, that would save money and time." "I can do that. What about supplies? Do you go to town regularly?" "Usually once a week, sometimes more if needed." "You can make a list of anything you need, and I will make sure you get it." Over the next few weeks, Willa settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn, prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, did laundry in the big tub behind the house, baked bread, tended a small vegetable garden she discovered behind the barn, and prepared 3 meals a day. The work was hard and physical, nothing like managing her father's small household with its single maid, but she found satisfaction in it. Her hands still trembled sometimes, especially when she was tired or stressed, but not as badly as before. Isaac was a good employer, respectful and appreciative, always thanking her for meals and checking that she had everything she needed. But he was also distant, maintaining a careful space between them that Willa found both reassuring and oddly disappointing. She told herself it was proper and right, that she was his employee and nothing more, but she could not help noticing the way his eyes followed her sometimes when he thought she was not looking. One afternoon in early September, Willa was in the garden picking tomatoes when she heard a horse approaching at speed. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw Isaac riding hard toward the house. Her heart leaped into her throat. Something was wrong. Isaac swung down from his horse before it had fully stopped. Willa, I need your help. Tommy took a bad fall. His leg is broken. Willa did not hesitate. She gathered her skirts and ran for the house. Where is he? Dutch is bringing him in the wagon. They are about 10 minutes behind me. Do you know anything about setting bones? I helped care for my father when he was ill. I know some basic medicine. She was already pulling down the clean linens she kept stored, her mind racing through what she would need. We will need something straight and strong for a splint, and something to use as padding, and whiskey, if you have it. Isaac grabbed a bottle from a high shelf while Willa spread a clean sheet on the kitchen table. Her hands were shaking again, but she forced them still through sheer willpower. A young man's health depended on her keeping calm. Dutch brought the wagon right up to the door, and Isaac and he carefully carried Tommy inside. The young man was pale and sweating, his face twisted in pain. His right leg was clearly broken below the knee, and Willa felt her stomach turn but did not let it show on her face. Set him on the table. Gently now. She turned to Tommy, taking his hand. I am going to help you, but it is going to hurt. Do you understand? Tommy nodded, biting his lip. Willa gave him a generous dose of whiskey, made him drink water, then gave him another dose. While they waited for the alcohol to dull his senses, she tore strips of cloth and prepared the splints Isaac had found. I will need you both to hold him, she told Isaac and Dutch. When I set the bone, he is going to try to pull away. Isaac moved to Tommy's shoulders, Dutch to his hips. Willa took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and examined the break. It was clean, at least not compound. She could do this. On 3, she said, her hands positioning themselves on either side of the break. 1, 2, 3. She pulled and twisted in one swift motion, feeling the bone slide back into place. Tommy screamed and then passed out, which was probably a mercy. Working quickly, Willa packed the leg with padding and secured the splints, binding them tightly but not so tight as to cut off circulation. When it was done, she stepped back, her hands shaking violently now that the immediate crisis was past. Isaac was there immediately, catching her hands in his just as he had that first day. You did good, real good. Is he going to be all right? Willa asked, staring at Tommy's unconscious form. The bone is set proper. I have seen plenty of breaks, and you did that as well as any doctor could have, Dutch said, his respect evident. The boy will heal. They moved Tommy to Willa's room since it was on the ground floor, and Willa insisted on sleeping on the sofa so she could tend to him during the night. Over the next few days, she nursed Tommy through the worst of it, managing his pain, changing his bandages, and making sure he ate and drank enough. Isaac watched her work with growing admiration, seeing a strength and competence in her that contradicted her refined exterior. One evening, after Tommy had finally fallen into a peaceful sleep, Willa came out to the main room to find Isaac sitting alone at the table, working on his account books by lamplight. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. How is he? Isaac asked, setting down his pen. Sleeping well. The worst of the pain has passed, I think. He will need to stay off that leg for at least 6 weeks, though. That is going to be hard for a boy like Tommy. He is not good at sitting still. Isaac studied her face in the lamplight. You look exhausted. You have been up with him for 3 nights now. I am fine, Willa said automatically, but even as she said it, her hands began their familiar trembling around the coffee cup. Isaac reached across the table and covered her hands with his, steadying them. It had become a habit between them, this gesture, though neither of them spoke of it. You do not always have to be fine, you know. You are allowed to be tired or scared or overwhelmed. Willa looked up at him, seeing genuine concern in his eyes. If I admit I am overwhelmed, I might fall apart completely. It is easier to just keep moving forward. Is that what you have been doing since your father died? just moving forward without letting yourself feel anything. She pulled her hands away, wrapping them around the coffee cup again. What choice did I have? Someone had to arrange the funeral, settle the debts, sell the house. Someone had to figure out how to survive. There was no time to fall apart. Isaac leaned back in his chair, watching her. You know, when my father died, I tried to do the same thing. I was 16, and I suddenly had to be the man of the family. I thought if I just worked hard enough and stayed strong enough, everything would be fine. What happened? I made myself sick, worked myself into exhaustion until I collapsed. My sister found me passed out in the barn, and she sat me down and made me cry. Actually forced me to sit there and talk about how much it hurt that Pa was gone. He smiled slightly at the memory. I hated it at the time, but she was right. You cannot just bury grief and expect it to stay buried. Willa stared into her coffee, feeling her throat tighten. I do not know how to let it out. I do not know how to grieve without losing myself completely. You do not have to do it alone, Isaac said softly. That is the whole point. She looked up at him, and something passed between them in the lamplight, something deeper than employer and employee, deeper than friendship. Willa felt it settle in her chest, warm and terrifying. I should check on Tommy again, she said, standing up quickly. Isaac let her go, but he watched her retreat with a thoughtful expression. As September gave way to October, Tommy's leg healed slowly but surely, and he graduated from bed to crutches. Willa continued to manage the household with quiet efficiency, and life on the ranch settled into a new normal. But something had shifted between her and Isaac, a growing awareness that neither of them could quite ignore. Isaac found excuses to be near her, helping her carry water from the well, fixing a stubborn window in her room that had stuck, teaching her to ride one of the gentler horses. Willa caught herself watching for him, timing her work so she would be in the kitchen when he came in for meals, lingering at the table after supper when Dutch and Tommy had gone to their bunks. One cool October evening, Isaac found Willa sitting on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl and watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. He sat down beside her without asking, and she made room for him naturally. "Beautiful, is it not?" she said softly. "It is." "Do you miss Philadelphia?" Willa considered the question. "I miss what Philadelphia was before my father got sick. I miss feeling safe and certain about the future. But the city itself, no, I do not think I ever truly fit there." "You think you fit here?" She turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her face. "I am beginning to. Is that strange? I have been here less than 2 months, but I feel more at home than I did in the house where I grew up." Isaac felt his heart beat faster. "You have made this place feel like a real home." "I did not realize what was missing until you got here." "Isaac," Willa said, her voice hesitant, "why did you really help me that day? You could have directed me to the boarding house and walked away. Why did you bring me here?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. "When I saw you get off that stage, looking so lost and scared, with your hands shaking like that, something in me just knew I could not walk away. I have thought about it a lot, trying to understand it myself, and the best I can figure is that I recognized something in you. That look of someone carrying too much alone. I know what that feels like, and I could not leave you to face it by yourself." "And now," Willa whispered. "What do you feel now?" Isaac turned to face her fully, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Now I think I am falling in love with you, and it scares the hell out of me." Willa's breath caught. "Why does it scare you?" "Because you are refined and educated, and you deserve someone who can give you the life you were meant to have. Not a cowboy scratching out a living on a Nevada ranch. You should have a house in town, and nice dresses and society." "You want to know what scares me?" Willa said, leaning into his touch. That I have fallen in love with you too, and you will wake up one day and realize I am just a burden you took on out of pity." "Willa," Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion, "you are not a burden. You are the best thing that has happened to me in years." "Then why have you been keeping your distance?" "Because I am trying to be honorable. You work for me. You depend on me for room and board. I did not want you to feel obligated or pressured." Willa reached up and covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. Her hands were steady, not trembling at all. "I do not feel obligated. I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like I finally found where I am supposed to be." Isaac leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and questioning, and Willa answered by pressing closer, her arms coming up around his neck. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring into it from both sides. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Isaac said again, his forehead resting against hers. "I have for weeks now. I just did not know how to tell you." "I love you too," Willa whispered. "You held my hand steady that first day, and you have been holding me together ever since." They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, talking quietly about everything and nothing, simply enjoying the freedom of finally being honest about their feelings. When the night grew cold, Isaac walked Willa to her door, kissed her good night with a tenderness that made her heart ache, and forced himself to go to his own room even though every instinct told him to stay with her. The next morning, Isaac asked Willa to take a ride with him after breakfast. They rode out across the ranch land, Isaac on his big bay gelding and Willa on the gentle mare he had been teaching her to ride. He took her to a high point that overlooked the entire valley, where the land rolled away in all directions under the bright autumn sky. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Isaac said, dismounting and helping Willa down. "I come here when I need to think." "It is beautiful," Willa said, taking in the vast expanse of land. "So much space, so much possibility." Isaac took both her hands in his, and she marveled at how steady her own hands were in his grip. "Willa, I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other for 2 months, but I am 32 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I want you to stay, not as my employee, but as my wife." Willa's eyes widened. "Isaac, you do not have to answer right now," he said quickly. "I know it is a lot to consider. I am not a rich man. I can give you a good life, but it will be a simple one. Hard work and quiet evenings and maybe more isolation than you are used to. But I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I promise I will hold your hands steady whenever they shake, and I promise I will never let you face anything alone again." Tears were streaming down Willa's face now, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, yes, I will marry you. I do not need time to think about it. I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Isaac let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Willa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. "When?" he asked, grinning like a fool. "When can we get married?" "As soon as you like. I have no family to invite, no elaborate plans to make. Just you and me, and whatever simple ceremony we can arrange." "Next week, then," Isaac said. "We will ride into town, find a preacher, and make this official." They rode back to the ranch, holding hands where they could, both giddy with happiness. Dutch and Tommy noticed immediately, and when Isaac announced their engagement, both men cheered. Tommy, still on crutches, insisted on shaking Isaac's hand and giving Willa a careful hug. "Best news we have had around here in years," Dutch said gruffly. "You two are good together. Anyone with eyes can see it." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Willa had nothing fancy to wear, but Ruth Carver, when she heard the news, appeared at the ranch with a beautiful dress that had belonged to her daughter. She married and moved to San Francisco, Ruth explained, pressing the dress into Willa's hands. She would want you to have it. Consider it a wedding gift. The dress was pale blue silk with ivory lace trim, far finer than anything Willa had worn in years. She tried it on and found it fit perfectly, and when she showed Isaac, she saw his eyes fill with tears. "You look like an angel," he said softly. On a crisp Saturday morning in late October, they rode into Lone Pine with Dutch and Tommy, who had insisted on coming along as witnesses. The local minister, a kindly man named Reverend Hayes, agreed to perform the ceremony that very afternoon. Willa stood in the small church, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that Tommy had picked, wearing the borrowed blue dress, and felt more beautiful than she ever had in any of her expensive Philadelphia gowns. Isaac stood beside her in his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with love and pride. Reverend Hayes kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt. When he asked if Isaac would take Willa to be his wife, Isaac answered in a strong, clear voice, "I will, and I promise to hold her steady through everything life brings." When Willa was asked the same question, she looked directly into Isaac's eyes and said, "I will." He held my hand steady when I arrived trembling and afraid, and I know he will never let go. They exchanged simple gold bands that Isaac had purchased in town, and when Reverend Hayes pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed Willa with such tenderness that Ruth, who had come to witness the wedding, openly wept. Afterwards, Ruth insisted on hosting a small celebration at the boarding house. She had prepared a wedding supper, and several townspeople whom Isaac knew came to offer their congratulations. Willa was touched by the warmth of these rough-edged frontier people, so different from the polished but often cold society she had known in Philadelphia. As evening approached, Isaac and Willa rode back to the ranch alone, leaving Dutch and Tommy to stay in town for the night to give the newlyweds privacy. The ride home was quiet but comfortable, both of them content to simply be together. At the ranch, Isaac helped Willa down from her horse and then, without warning, swept her up in his arms. "I am carrying my bride over the threshold properly," he declared, making her laugh. Inside, he set her down gently, and suddenly they were both a little shy, the reality of being married settling over them. Isaac lit a few lamps while Willa stood in the middle of the room, her hands clasped together. "Are you nervous?" Isaac asked softly, coming to stand in front of her. "A little," Willa admitted, "but not in a bad way." "Are you terrified?" Isaac said with a small smile. "I want everything to be perfect for you, and I am afraid I will mess it up somehow." Willa reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Isaac, you have already given me more than I ever dreamed of. A home, a purpose, love. You could not mess this up if you tried." He covered her hands with his own, noting that they were perfectly steady. "Your hands are not shaking. They have not shaken in weeks. Not since I admitted I loved you. I think I just needed to feel safe again, to know I was not facing everything alone." Isaac kissed her palms, then her wrists, then pulled her close and kissed her mouth with growing passion. Willa responded eagerly, all her nervousness melting away in the warmth of his embrace. They made their way to his bedroom, which was now theirs, and loved each other with a tenderness and joy that felt like coming home. Later, lying in Isaac's arms with her head on his chest, Willa felt a peace she had not known since childhood. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For saving me. For seeing past the trembling mess I was when I arrived. For holding steady when I could not." Isaac tightened his arms around her. "You saved yourself, Willa. You had the courage to get on that stage alone and come west to an uncertain future. All I did was recognize how strong you already were." "We saved each other then," Willa said, tilting her head up to kiss his jaw. "Is that not what marriage should be?" "I reckon it is," Isaac agreed, smiling in the darkness. Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Willa continued to manage the household, but now it was her home, not just her job. She and Isaac worked side by side, building a life together, and she found satisfaction in the simple routines of ranch life. Isaac taught her more about riding, and she taught him about literature and poetry, reading aloud to him in the evenings by lamplight. As winter set in, Willa discovered she was pregnant. Isaac was overjoyed, but also worried, fussing over her constantly and trying to keep her from doing any heavy work. Willa tolerated his concern with amusement, assuring him that she was healthy and strong. "I am growing a baby, not dying of consumption," she said one morning when Isaac tried to insist she stay in bed instead of making breakfast. "I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe," Isaac said defensively. Willa took his face in her hands, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "We are safe. We are loved. We are going to be fine." Their son was born on a warm June evening in 1878, with Ruth Carver serving as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and Isaac paced outside the bedroom door, terrified. But when he finally heard his son's first cry, he burst through the door to find Willa exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny, red-faced baby. "Meet your son," she said softly. Isaac approached the bed with tears streaming down his face, looking down at the miracle in his wife's arms. "He is perfect. You are perfect." They named him James Martin after Isaac's father and Willa's uncle, and he became the center of their world. Isaac was a devoted father, taking James with him on the ranch whenever possible, even when he was just an infant bundled up in a sling. Willa would watch them from the house and feel her heart swell with love and gratitude. As James grew into a curious toddler, Willa found herself pregnant again. Their daughter, Clara Ruth, was born in the spring of 1880 and completed their family. Tommy, now fully recovered from his broken leg and still working on the ranch, declared himself the children's honorary uncle, and even Dutch could be found sneaking them treats and whittling them toys. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch prospered under Isaac's careful management, and they were able to expand their herd and make improvements to the property. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, but kept the old one for Dutch and Tommy, who had both become like family. One evening in the summer of 1885, when James was 7 and Clara 5, Willa stood on the porch of their new house watching the children play in the yard. Isaac came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different my life is from what I imagined it would be. When I got off that stage 8 years ago, I was so lost and scared. I thought I had hit the bottom, that my life was over before it had really begun. And now—" Willa turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "Now I know that sometimes you have to fall apart before you can be put back together properly. I had to lose everything I thought I wanted to find what I actually needed." Isaac smiled and kissed her forehead. "I am a lucky man, Willa O'Brien. I am a lucky woman, Isaac O'Brien." James came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can we ride out to the far pasture tomorrow? I want to see the new calves." "If your mother says it is all right," Isaac said, ruffling his son's hair. "Can I come too?" Clara demanded, not wanting to be left out. "Everyone can come," Willa said, laughing. "We will make a day of it and have a picnic." The children cheered and ran off to play again, and Willa and Isaac stood together in the gathering dusk, comfortable in the life they had built. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Isaac asked. "The culture, the society, all of that." Willa shook her head. "Not even a little bit. I have everything I need right here." "Your hands are steady," Isaac observed, taking them in his own anyway, the gesture now one of love rather than necessity. "They have been for years," Willa said, squeezing his fingers. "Ever since that first day when you held them and promised to help me." "You kept that promise, Isaac. You have held me steady through everything." "And I always will," Isaac said, pulling her close. "Until the day I die, I will never let go." The next day, true to their word, the whole family rode out to the far pasture. Isaac led the way on his horse with James sitting in front of him, while Willa rode the gentle mare with Clara. They spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree and ate the lunch Willa had packed, watching the calves gambol in the grass. James, who had inherited his mother's love of learning and his father's practical nature, asked endless questions about the cattle and the ranch. Clara, more artistic and dreamy, made flower chains and told elaborate stories about the clouds. Isaac and Willa exchanged glances over their children's heads, marveling at these people they had created together. On the ride back, Clara fell asleep against Willa's chest, and James dozed against Isaac's shoulder. The sun was setting, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Willa thought about how this landscape that had seemed so alien and harsh 8 years ago now felt like the only home she could imagine. When they reached the ranch, Dutch and Tommy came out to help with the horses. Both men had stayed on over the years, becoming part of the family. Dutch was training James in the finer points of ranching, while Tommy, who had discovered a talent for woodworking, had made Clara a beautiful dollhouse that was her most prized possession. That night, after the children were tucked into bed, Isaac and Willa sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge. It had become their ritual, these quiet evenings together, talking about their day and making plans for the future. "I was thinking," Isaac said, "that maybe next summer we could take a trip to California to visit my sister. The children should know their aunt, and I would like you to meet her." "I would like that," Willa said, "though the thought of traveling with 2 young children is somewhat daunting." Isaac laughed. "No more daunting than you crossing the country alone when you were barely 21. I was 22, and I was terrified every moment of it. But you did it anyway. That is what makes you brave, Willa. Not that you were not scared, but that you did what needed to be done even though you were." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. "I could not have done any of it without you." "We are good together," Isaac said simply, kissing the top of her head. "We always have been." As the years continued to pass, the O'Brien Ranch became one of the most respected in the region. Isaac's fair dealing and Willa's intelligence, together with their willingness to adopt new ranching techniques, made them successful. They employed several more ranch hands as the operation grew, and Willa found herself managing not just a household but a small community. James grew into a tall, serious boy who was happiest working alongside his father. By the time he was 12, he could handle most ranch work as well as any adult. Clara remained dreamy and artistic, but she had inherited her mother's strength and her father's determination. She learned to ride as well as any boy and was not afraid of hard work. In the summer of 1890, when Willa was 34 and Isaac 38, they took their long-planned trip to California. They traveled by train this time, a far cry from Willa's original journey by stagecoach, and the children were entranced by everything they saw. Isaac's sister Margaret welcomed them warmly to her farm in the Central Valley. She and Willa became instant friends, both recognizing in each other the strength it took to make a life in the West. Margaret's children and James and Clara bonded quickly, and the 2 families spent a wonderful month together. On the last evening of their visit, Margaret and Willa sat on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset while Isaac and Margaret's husband talked about farming and ranching. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm evening air. "Isaac wrote to me about you after you first arrived," Margaret said. "He said he had met a woman who needed help and he was going to give her a job." "I am sure that sounded impulsive to you," Willa said with a smile. "Actually, I was happy." Isaac had been alone for so long, focusing only on building his ranch. I worried about him out there with no real life beyond work. But then his letters started changing. He would mention little things about you, how smart you were, how hard you worked, how you had transformed the ranch house into a real home. I knew before he did that he had fallen in love. Willa felt her eyes mist. "I fell in love with him the day we met, though I did not recognize it then. I just knew that when he held my hands to stop their trembling, I felt safe for the first time in months. He told me about your hands shaking. He said it broke his heart to see you like that. They have not shaken in years now. Isaac healed me in ways I did not even know I needed healing." Margaret reached over and squeezed Willa's hand. "You healed him too. Before you came, Isaac was just surviving, going through the motions. You gave him a reason to really live. I am grateful to you for that." When they returned to Nevada, Willa found herself looking at their ranch with fresh eyes, seeing it as the achievement it was. She and Isaac had built this together, from that first desperate day when he had offered her a job she was not qualified for, through the challenges of establishing a life together, to the thriving ranch it had become. That fall, as they worked together to prepare for winter, Willa realized she was pregnant again. She was surprised, having thought her childbearing years were behind her, but Isaac was delighted. "One more," he said, holding her close. "One more blessing." Their second son was born in the spring of 1891, and they named him Thomas, after Tommy, who cried when they told him. Thomas was a sunny, easy baby, bringing joy to the whole household. The years continued to roll by in a pattern of hard work and simple pleasures. They saw droughts and harsh winters, boom times and lean times, but through it all, their love remained steady and strong. Isaac kept his promise to hold Willa steady through everything, and she did the same for him. James grew into a man and took over more and more of the ranch management. At 20, he married a local girl named Sarah, and they built a house on the far edge of the ranch property. Clara, who had inherited her mother's love of learning, became a teacher in Lone Pine, riding back and forth each day on the horse her father had given her for her 16th birthday. Thomas grew up adored by his older siblings, surrounded by love and security that his parents had never known at his age. He was a natural horseman and a charming talker, able to sweet-talk his way out of any trouble. In the summer of 1900, Isaac and Willa celebrated their 23rd anniversary quietly, sitting on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Isaac was 51 now, his dark hair streaked with gray, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. Willa was 44, still beautiful, her dark hair now shot through with silver. 23 years, Willa mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. "I cannot even remember what my life was like before you," Isaac said, taking her hand in his customary gesture. "It is like my real life started the day you stepped off that stage." "My hands are not shaking," Willa said, smiling at the familiar weight of his hands on hers. "They have not shaken in 23 years," Isaac said, "but I am never going to stop holding them anyway. Promise, promise. I told you that first day that I would hold them steady and never let go. I meant it then, and I mean it now." Willa leaned over and kissed him, a kiss that still held all the passion and love of their early days, tempered now with the deep comfort of 2 decades together. Best decision I ever made was getting on that stage to Nevada. Best decision I ever made was offering you a job you were not qualified for, Isaac countered, making her laugh. Their laughter carried on the evening air, mixing with the sounds of the ranch, the sounds that had become the soundtrack of their life together. As the new century dawned, the O'Brien Ranch continued to thrive. James and Sarah had 3 children of their own, and Clara married a fellow teacher and settled in Lone Pine. Thomas, at 10, was already showing signs of becoming a rancher like his father and brother. Isaac and Willa moved into the grandparent years with grace and joy. They were still active in running the ranch, but they also had time now to simply enjoy each other's company, to take long rides across the land they loved, to sit together in comfortable silence. One morning in the spring of 1903, Willa woke to find Isaac already up, standing at the bedroom window looking out at the dawn. She rose and joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Could not sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking about how lucky I am, how blessed we have been." "We have worked hard for everything we have," Willa reminded him. "True. But the hard work would have meant nothing without you beside me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa. You and our children and the life we built together." Willa rested her head against his shoulder. "I was so lost when I arrived here. I thought my life was over. I could not imagine how I would survive, let alone be happy again." "You were never really lost," Isaac said, turning to face her and taking both her hands in his. "You just had not found your way home yet. And you were my home." From that very first day, they stood together in the growing light, their hands joined, their hearts beating in sync. 2 people who had found each other when they both needed it most, and had built a life that exceeded any dream either of them had dared to have. That summer, the whole family gathered for a big celebration on the ranch. James and Sarah brought the grandchildren. Clara and her husband came from town. Tommy and Dutch, both now in their 60s but still working on the ranch, joined them. Even Ruth Carver, now in her 80s, made the trip from Lone Pine. They set up long tables in the yard and had a feast that Willa and her daughters-in-law prepared together. The children ran wild, playing the same games James and Clara had played years before. The men talked about ranching and the changes they had seen over the decades. The women shared stories and laughter. As the sun began to set, Isaac stood up and tapped his glass for attention. "I am not much for speeches," he said, "but I want to say something while we are all together. 26 years ago, I was a lonely cowboy running a ranch by myself, thinking that was all life had to offer. Then one day, a woman stepped off a stage in Lone Pine, trembling and scared and needing help. I offered her a job and she gave me a life." He looked at Willa, his eyes shining with emotion. "Willa, you are the strongest person I know. You came west with nothing but courage and hope, and you built this family, this home, this life. I held your hand steady that first day, but you have been holding my heart steady every day since." Willa rose and went to him, taking his hands in hers as everyone applauded. "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until the end." They kissed, and their children and grandchildren cheered, and Willa thought about how that scared young woman stepping off the stage could never have imagined this moment, this life, this overwhelming abundance of love. As the celebration continued into the evening, Willa found a quiet moment to sit with Ruth, who had been watching everything with satisfaction. "You did well for yourself," Ruth said. "I remember that day you arrived, how lost you looked. I did not think a city girl like you would last a month out here." "I did not think so either," Willa admitted, "but Isaac believed in me before I believed in myself." "That is what good love does," Ruth said. "It sees who you really are and helps you become that person." The evening ended with dancing. Isaac led Willa out for the first dance, and they moved together as naturally as breathing, their bodies knowing each other after 26 years of marriage. When the song ended, they kept swaying, reluctant to let go. "Thank you," Willa whispered. "For what?" "For holding my hand steady, for never letting go just like you promised." "I will never let go," Isaac said, holding her closer. "Not now, not ever." The years that followed were gentle ones. They saw their grandchildren grow, welcomed new babies, and mourned the loss of old friends. Dutch passed away in his sleep in 1905, and Tommy followed 2 years later. Ruth lived to be 90 before passing peacefully. Each loss was hard, but Isaac and Willa held each other through the grief, their love providing strength and comfort. In 1910, on a perfect autumn day much like the one when they had married, Isaac and Willa sat on their porch watching their youngest grandchild, James's daughter Emma, play in the yard. Isaac was 61 now, Willa 54, and both felt the weight of their years, but neither regretted a single day. "Do you ever wonder how different your life would have been if your uncle had not died?" Isaac asked. "If you had gone to work at his boarding house instead of ending up here?" Willa considered it. "Sometimes, but I think somehow I would have found my way to you anyway. I think we were meant to find each other." "I am glad it was me who was there that day," Isaac said. "Glad I was the one who got to hold your hand steady." "So am I. You saved my life, Isaac. Not just by giving me a job, but by giving me a reason to keep living. You saw me when I was broken and loved me anyway." "You were never broken," Isaac corrected gently. "You were just bent for a while, but you straightened yourself out. I just steadied you while you did it." Willa laughed softly. "Still arguing with me after 33 years. "It is one of my favorite things to do," Isaac said, grinning. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as always, watching the sun set over the land they had made their own. Life had been hard sometimes, full of challenges and setbacks, but it had also been rich with love and meaning and purpose. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Isaac pulled Willa close and said, "I want you to know that these have been the best years of my life. Every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days," Willa teased, "especially the hard days because we faced them together." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, and afterwards, Willa lay in Isaac's arms feeling utterly content. Her hands rested on his chest, steady and sure, no trace of the trembling that had once plagued her. "I am not afraid anymore," she said softly, "of anything, because I know that whatever comes, you will be there to hold me steady." "Always," Isaac promised. "Until my last breath and beyond, I will never let go." The years rolled on, bringing both joy and sorrow as years do. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, welcomed great-grandchildren, and slowly began to hand over more of the ranch operations to James and Thomas. Isaac's hair went completely white, and Willa's arthritis made her hands stiff some mornings, but they still walked the ranch together when weather permitted, still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands whenever they could. In the spring of 1915, Isaac fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then developed into pneumonia. Willa nursed him with the same fierce determination she had shown nursing Tommy all those years ago, but this time, her skills were not enough. On a quiet May morning, with Willa holding his hands and their children gathered around, Isaac O'Brien took his last breath. Willa felt her world tilt sideways, felt her hands begin to shake for the first time in 38 years. But as she sat there holding Isaac's still hands, she realized that even in death, he was still holding her steady. His love had not died with him. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built together, in the memories of 38 years of partnership and devotion. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree where they had often gone to sit and talk. Willa stood at the graveside, flanked by her children, and said goodbye to the man who had held her steady when she arrived with trembling hands and had kept his promise never to let go. In the days that followed, Willa grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had been blessed beyond measure, loved beyond words, and she would not dishonor that by falling apart now. Isaac had believed in her strength from the very beginning, and she would prove him right. She stayed on the ranch, now managed by James, and made herself useful however she could. She told stories about their early days to the grandchildren, teaching them about the man their grandfather had been. She wrote down the history of the ranch, so future generations would know how it had begun with a scared young woman and a kind cowboy who had refused to let her face the world alone. One evening in the summer of 1920, Willa sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as she and Isaac had done thousands of times. She was 64 years old now, her hair completely silver, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. Her hands rested in her lap, steady and sure. Clara came out to join her, sitting down in the chair that had been Isaac's. "How are you, Mama?" "I am well, dear. Just remembering. Tell me again about the day you met Papa." Willa smiled, always happy to tell this particular story. "I stepped off that stage in Lone Pine feeling more lost and scared than I had ever been in my life. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my bag. I had just learned my uncle had died, and I had no money, no plan, no hope. And then your father appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not even known to pray. He looked at me with such kindness, such concern, and when my legs gave out, he caught me." "And then he held your hand steady," Clara prompted, knowing the story by heart but never tiring of it. "And then he held my hand steady," Willa confirmed. "He looked me in the eye and told me he would help me, and I believed him. He brought me here, gave me work, gave me a home, and eventually gave me his heart. Your father kept every promise he ever made to me, including the one to never let go." "Do you miss him?" "Every single day. But I also carry him with me every single day. He is in the land we built together, in you children and your children, in every sunset I watch from this porch. Death could not change what we had, Clara. Love that strong does not end just because one person is gone." Clara took her mother's hand, noting how steady it was. "Your hands never shake anymore." "No," Willa said. "Isaac held them steady for so long that I learned how to do it myself. But I still feel his hands in mine sometimes, especially when I need them most. That is the gift he gave me, the strength to stand on my own, even as he stood beside me." As the sun set over the Nevada landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Willa felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and purpose. She had arrived in Lone Pine broken and trembling, and Isaac O'Brien had held her steady until she learned to hold herself steady. He had loved her fiercely and completely, and she had loved him the same way. The ranch would go on, passed down through generations of O'Briens. The story of how it began, with a frightened young woman and a kind cowboy, would be told and retold. And somewhere beyond the sunset, Willa knew, Isaac was waiting for her with open arms and steady hands, ready to hold her close again when her time came. But that time was not yet. Willa still had years ahead of her, years to love her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, years to tend the land that had become her home, years to honor the memory of the man who had seen her at her lowest and loved her into becoming her best self. As the last light faded from the sky, Willa stood and went inside, her steps sure and steady. She had arrived with trembling hands, and the cowboy had held them steady and never let go. And in doing so, he had given her not just love, but the courage to become the strong woman she had always been meant to be. That was their love story, and it would echo through the generations, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of devotion, and the healing that comes when two lost souls find each other and decide to build a life together. Willa lived to be 78 years old, passing peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1934. She was buried beside Isaac under the cottonwood tree, and at her funeral, her great-grandchildren talked about how even in her old age, her hands had remained steady, a testament to the love that had healed her so many years before. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, a lasting monument to the love of Isaac and Willa O'Brien, the cowboy and the woman with trembling hands who had found each other when they both needed it most and had built something beautiful together. Their story became legend in Lone Pine, told as a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things, that kindness can change everything, and that true love really does have the power to hold us steady through whatever storms may come. And if you stood on that hill at sunset, under the cottonwood tree where two simple headstones marked their final resting place, you could almost feel it, the echo of a love so strong that even death could not diminish it, the memory of a cowboy's steady hands holding on tight to the woman he loved, keeping his promise never to let go, not in life, not in death, not ever.